Pop culture loves to sell us the image of the mastermind general, playing four-dimensional chess against an opponent. But the historical record reveals a much messier truth. Some of the deadliest military operations on record collapsed entirely on their own, without the enemy having to lift a finger. Take Operation Cottage in August 1943. 34,000 American and Canadian troops stormed onto the beaches of Kiska in the Aleutian Islands. They hit the shore heavily armed, tightly coiled, and braced for a brutal amphibious assault. The massive landing force crept through a thick, blinding fog, waiting for the first wave of machine gun fire. It never came. The Japanese garrison had quietly slipped away 2 weeks earlier, leaving behind a completely empty rock. But an empty battlefield didn't mean a safe one. Blinded by the mist and wound tight with anticipation, Allied units began mistaking each other for the enemy and opening fire. By the time command realized no one else was on the island, 92 men were dead and over 200 injured from friendly fire, frostbite, and leftover booby traps. It proves a stark point. The greatest threat to an invading force is rarely the army waiting on the other side of the hill. The real danger is a total collapse of logic and situational awareness inside the command tent. To see how these disasters unfold, look at the first immutable rule of warfare. The physical environment holds absolute veto power over any strategic plan. In December 1914, Austro-Hungarian chief Konrad von Hötzendorf decided to march an army over the Carpathian Mountains. He drafted his grand relief plan from the comfort of a heated room, completely detached from the reality that he was sending out men in summer uniforms with absolutely no winter training. Temperatures plunged below -20 degrees. Men were forced to cut the boots off corpses because their own had rotted away. Whole regiments simply froze upright at their posts, dead in the snow before they ever laid eyes on a Russian soldier. That exact same cognitive disconnect struck the Ottoman Minister of War, Enver Pasha. Driven by pure ambition, he pushed 100,000 unprepared troops into the freezing Caucasus Mountains at Sarikamish, losing tens of thousands of men to the cold overnight. That arrogance doesn't end at the shoreline. Oceanic environments are just as unforgiving to commanders who think they can outstubborn nature. Kublai Khan lost more than half his 1281 invasion force in a single night because he crammed his troops onto cheap river barges right in the middle of typhoon season off the coast of Japan. 300 years later, the Spanish Armada suffered a shockingly similar fate when Atlantic storms chewed up their retreating fleet. A commander can have superior numbers and bottomless funding, but a strategy that ignores geography is not a strategy. It is a mass casualty event waiting to happen. Even if an army survives the terrain, sheer scale and advanced technology will lead to ruin if the commander fails to assess how their opponent operates. Look at the Winter War of 1939. Joseph Stalin had spent the previous 2 years executing his most experienced military tacticians. He replaced them with political yes-men who lacked any practical combat experience. These new loyalists drove long, heavily armored tank columns straight down narrow, snow-packed Finnish roads. They advanced in single file, deploying massive machines of war without flank security or winter camouflage. The Finns were outnumbered 100 to 1 in tanks, but they understood the terrain. Wearing white snowsuits and gliding on skis, they used highly mobile Mahdi tactics, surrounding and isolating segments of the trapped Soviet columns, carving the heavy armor into pieces, unit by unit. This specific flavor of tactical blindness played out 60 years earlier, thousands of miles away, at the Battle of Isandlwana. British commander Lord Chelmsford arrogantly refused to order defensive trenches or circle his supply wagons, fatally underestimating a highly organized force of 20,000 Zulu warriors. He left his camp completely exposed. By the end of the afternoon, 1,300 British and colonial troops were dead. Overwhelming technological superiority becomes a fatal liability against an enemy you haven't bothered to understand. But there is an internal threat that destroys armies even faster than weather or clever opponents, sacrificing unity of command to feed a leader's ego. In 1005 BC, Rome deployed 2 massive armies, totaling around 100,000 men, to stop the Germanic Cimbri and Teutons at the Battle of Arezzo. The 2 Roman commanders, a patrician aristocrat and a newly promoted commoner, absolutely despised each other. Their class friction was so intense that they refused to coordinate defensive orders, and one wouldn't even camp his legion near the other. When the Germanic tribes attacked, the divided Roman forces couldn't support each other. Both armies were annihilated individually in a single afternoon, resulting in the bloodiest Roman defeat. For the ultimate historical example of unchecked vanity, we turn to 1864 Paraguay. President Francisco Solano Lopez decided he was the Napoleon of South America and declared war on Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay all at once. Facing nations with 10 times his combined population, the math was hopeless from day one. Yet Lopez refused to negotiate. When he ran out of men, he conscripted teenagers. When they ran out, he drafted 12-year-old boys and painted mustaches on their faces to fill out the ranks. By the time the war ended, Paraguay lost up to 70% of its entire population. When leadership decisions are dictated by personal vanity rather than external reality, the army essentially becomes its own executioner. The Roman consuls, the First World War generals, the 19th century dictators, they all suffered from the exact same psychological trap: severe cognitive dissonance. We can visualize this military failure with a simple chart. Notice this widening gap between a commander's perceived strategy, a clean upward trajectory, and the chaotic downward line representing the actual ground reality. Cognitive dissonance and military context is the precise moment a leader stops managing the facts of the battlefield and starts managing the fantasy inside their own head. It exposes the core mathematical truth of warfare. Military might is merely a multiplier. If your troop strength is multiplied by a foundational strategic logic of 0, the total output will always be 0. Whether you are moving legions across a continent, running a multinational business, or managing a tight project, attempting to override the rigid laws of reality with pure willpower is a guaranteed march towards self-destruction.